Hello, my name is Christopher Scott. Thanks for joining me for another one of these videos where I am giving you an overview and a review of the different ways that people interpret the creation account of Genesis chapter 1. So in this video, I want to review evolutionary creation. And similar to these other videos I've done here on YouTube, I want to give you a summary of the view. I'll list for you the strengths of that view, the weaknesses of the view, as well as some people that support that view and some resources you can go to and read that will give you more information on this view if you'd like to learn about it. So in this video, I want to share with you about evolutionary creation. It goes by a few different names and I'll share those later, but evolutionary creation. Here's our summary of evolutionary creation. Evolutionary creation holds two beliefs. Evolution is real and the Bible is true. They hold those two statements as facts. In evolutionary creation, the evolutionary process, in that process, God chose at times to act supernaturally, and evolution was the mechanism that God used to achieve his purposes over billions of years. In evolutionary creation, all species arose through gradual change and are related by a tree of common ancestry. Our human ancestors were a group of several thousand humans that evolved from apes, according to evolutionary creation. In this view, the first humans lived 150,000 to 200,000 years ago. The evolutionary process results in natural selection, microevolution, as well as macroevolution. Evolutionary creation states that the gospel is the central message of Scripture and that Scripture is authoritative but not inerrant. That's an important point for most people that take the evolutionary creationist view. They don't believe Scripture is inerrant, but they do believe it is authoritative. This view rejects a literal interpretation of all aspects of Scripture that describes creation. Evolutionary creationism does not see science as a tool for ascribing truth or reliability of Scripture. It states that the Bible does not make specific scientific predictions, and it believes geological evidence does not support a worldwide flood, and believes the basic laws of physics did not change with the flood or the fall, since those were not literal events according to their interpretation. So that's a summary of evolutionary creation. Here are some strengths. People that hold this view, these are the things that they will put forward to support their interpretation and their view about creation. They say that the human genome is similar to chimpanzees and also has extra pointless, what they call junk, right? There are things in the human genome that we have as humans as well as chimpanzees have that don't serve a purpose, and that shows that we are ancestors and related. Another strength is it states that the Bible is not intended to describe science, right? The Bible is not a tool to look at science, and I would agree with that you're not going to, the Bible is not a scientific textbook. A third strength of evolutionary creation is it believes science and the natural laws that it discovers are a testimony to God's care of all matter and mechanisms. Another support for evolutionary creation is that it has support from geological evidence, right? There are annual layers of ice from glaciers that have been counted back over 100,000 years in Greenland and over 700,000 years in Antarctica. It also has support that there are annual layers of sedimentary rock formed at the bottom of lakes and shallow seas, and shows that those are millions of years old, that there are deposits over millions of years. It also has support from radiometric dating. And using radiometric dating, it is possible for some atoms that are radioactive and decay over time to measure how old they are. For example, a rock formation in Greenland has been dated to 3.6 billion years old, and rocks returned from the moon have also been dated to 4.5 billion years. So it has support from certain areas of science, obviously: geological evidence, radiometric dating, and annual layers of sedimentary rock. It also has support from astronomical evidence because light obviously takes time to travel. And the light we see, for example, from the Andromeda galaxy, which is the closest galaxy to Earth, takes 2.5 million light years to arrive. It takes 2.5 million years to arrive to us. And a final strength for this view is that it states Genesis focuses on the who of creation, not how and when, right? Genesis focuses on who and why of creation, not how and when. And I would make that same assertion as well. Maybe not as strongly as them, but that is a correct understanding of Genesis 1 and Genesis chapters 1 through 11. So those are some of the strengths of the evolutionary creation view. Here are some weaknesses. And these are interpreted through my lens as a young Earth creationist. Some of the weaknesses. While the main focus of Genesis is who God is, there is still a strong focus on how things are created and when they are created. Specifically, there are statements about the order of creation. On day 1, this happened. Day 2, this happened. Day 3, this happened. Right? And there are specific statements of time. There was evening and morning on the first day. There was evening and morning on the second day. Things like that. There are many other words Moses could have used to describe time, but he chose specific time words. Another weakness of this view is that the primary focus for evolutionary creationists is they focus on what they call the book of nature, right? The things we see around us: dirt, the time it takes light to travel, physics, the genome and DNA. They focus on the book of nature that they see. They don't focus on the book of scripture, which we read. And they use the book of nature with much, much, much more emphasis than the book of scripture. Another weakness of evolutionary creation is that it refuses the possibility of supernatural interference, right? That things progressed in an ordered way and in a process that we can explain based on science. It didn't require God to act supernaturally. Another weakness of evolutionary creation is that it's contrary to the clear teaching of Genesis 3:20, Acts 7:26, Romans 5:12 through 19, and 1 Corinthians 15 verses 20 to 22. Those 4 passages all specifically state that human beings descended from one man and one woman. Okay? According to evolutionary creation, our human ancestors was a group of several thousand humans that evolved from apes. Right, that lived 200,000 years ago, not from a literal man and woman. But that's contrary to what Genesis, Acts, Romans, and 1 Corinthians all teach us. Another weakness of evolutionary creation is in Scripture, when it talks about the creation of the earth, it's never described as a long process. It's always described as an act in the past that seemed to happen quickly. Many scientists, another weakness, both secular and Christian, question the validity of evolution. And evolutionary creation, obviously, holds closely to evolution and pretty much believes everything in evolution is true and correct. But there was God that occasionally intervened or helped or gave things a little nudge to help them along. Another weakness of evolutionary creation is that Adam and Eve were not the sole progenitors of the human race. Therefore, they have to give 3 possibilities for how the human race came and what Genesis means when it talks about Adam and Eve. So there's kind of 3 different ways they have to get around that. One is that they say Adam and Eve were, quote, ancient representatives, unquote, of humanity that entered into relationship with God 200,000 years ago in Africa. That's one way they get around that issue. A second way they get around that issue is that Adam and Eve were recent representatives living about 6,000 years ago in the ancient Near East. That's the second way. I mean, again, there's a group of 1,000 human beings, maybe, or 10,000 human beings, but God chose Adam and Eve in the ancient Near East, or God chose Adam and Eve in Africa. A third way they get around this issue is that Adam and Eve are viewed not as historical persons, but instead as symbolic stories in the genre of the ancient Near East. And I have a video on that you can find as well here on YouTube on ancient Near Eastern creation myth. So that's another weakness, is that since evolution came about, and that's how humans came about, was through 1,000 or 10,000 human beings being evolved. They have to find a way to explain what Scripture means when it describes Adam and Eve being the beginning of the human race. Another weakness is that evolutionary creation diminishes the doctrine of humans being made in the image of God. It diminishes the doctrine of original sin. It falsely teaches death before the fall of Genesis 3. It allows for natural evil before the fall of Genesis 3, and allows for a randomness of creation instead of a divine sovereign God specifically creating what he wanted to create. Another weakness, I've got a lot for this view, is that evolutionary creation must reinterpret the significance of the fall of Genesis 3, the flood of Genesis 6 through 9, and the significance again of Romans 5 verses 12 to 21 that describes Adam and Eve being the beginning of the human race. Right? So they have to reinterpret the significance of those events and those scriptures. And lastly, weakness, animals, specifically fossils, they appear long before humans in the geological records. Why would there be billions of years of death of fossils before the fall of humans and entry of sin and death into the world in Genesis 3? The order seems to be backwards if you follow evolution, not according to Scripture. So evolutionary creation, that's a summary of the view, the strengths of the view, and my weaknesses of this view. It also goes by theistic evolution, or theistic creation, or evolutionary creation. If you'd like to read more on this, I have a book that I adapted some of these notes from that's titled 4 Views on Creation, Evolution, and Intelligent Design. I'll try to remember to put that down there in the description. It's a good book to read if you're curious. And I've adapted Deborah Harzma's arguments for this video. Another book on theistic evolution or evolutionary creation would be Dennis Alexander's book, Creation or Evolution? Do we have to choose? You can read Francis Collins, his book, The Language of God, or Howard Van Til, Portraits of Creation, Biblical and Scientific Perspectives of the World's Formation, or Howard Van Til, The Fourth Day. Those are books that will give you more resources and more reading on evolutionary creation. And a popular supporter of this view would be Dietrich Bonhoeffer. If you've read Dietrich Bonhoeffer, or you're familiar with his book, Creation and Fall, it's based on Genesis 1 through 3. I've been reading through that, and he would fall under this evolutionary creation or theistic evolution view. So I hope this video has been helpful for you to learn more about these different ways that people interpret what we read about in Genesis 1. If you have thoughts or opinions or questions on this view, or would like to add to the discussion, feel free to leave a comment here on YouTube. Thanks for watching. I hope to catch you again on another video.